Um, okay, so should I start?
Yes, you can start.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Diptyaroop Maji, and today I'll talk about our paper, HeliosFair, Fair Sharing of Solar Energy Costs in Communities. This is joint work with Vani Gupta, Prashant, Shenoy, and Ramesh Sitaraman at UMass Amherst and RW. So over the last decade, solar has become a prevalent source of electricity as people turn towards clean, renewable sources of electricity generation in order to mitigate climate change. So the figure on the right shows how solar capacity has increased in the US over the last 10 years. To encourage even more clean energy adoption, solar is becoming increasingly cheaper day by day, such that generating electricity from rooftop solar is now cheaper than purchasing electricity from utility in many places. So consequently, more and more houses are installing rooftop solar to meet their electricity demand at a lower cost and also with clean energy. However, rooftop solar is constrained by factors like roof area, shading, and so on. And so not all houses can generate enough solar to meet their demand. As we like, for example, let's take the house on the left. It has a shading and also has a small roof area. So using solar panels, it can only meet a fraction of its demand. On the other hand, the house on the right can meet its total demand using solar panels and still has some roof space left. So can these houses do something to meet this remaining demand also with solar, thus further reducing the costs and increasing the green energy consumption? As it turns out, yes. And a way to do this is by sharing solar infrastructure and energy, where houses with surplus roof capacity, for example, the house on the right, can install more panels when there is unmet demand from other houses and share the generated solar with such houses. So thus, solar energy sharing can further reduce the electricity costs of each house. And there is also an increase in the amount of clean energy consumption. But in this paper, we will just focus on the cost reduction aspects. So I've seen that solar energy sharing is beneficial, but it also has several challenges. For example, as we see here, solar generation varies across and even within a rooftop, like due to reasons like shading, roof direction, and so on. So in this figure, the darker parts, like slightly pinkish tinge, so they generate less solar, but the brighter yellowish parts of the roof, they generate more solar. So our question then naturally arises that how do we minimize the total electricity costs of meeting the demand of all the houses when they're sharing solar energy? And by total costs, I mean both the capex cost of installing solar panels and the opex cost, that is the electricity procurement cost from utility if there is any unmet demand that is not met by solar. Also, houses get cost savings only when there are some houses that have unmet demand, and then there are houses with surplus roof capacity that can install panels to meet this demand. So how do we distribute these cost savings? This is the second question. How do we distribute these cost savings between both sets of houses in a fair way such that all the houses are happy and they agree to share? So we are trying to answer these two questions in our work, and there have been other works that have tried to answer these questions. However, they have either looked only at OPEX cost, ignoring the CAPEX cost of installing panels, which is also significant, or they ignored factors like this solar generation variations that we see across the rooftops, which is also important. So to overcome the limitations of these prior works, we present HeliosFair, which minimizes CAPEX and OPEX costs jointly, which considers factors like solar generation variation across the rooftops and also fairly distributes the savings based on their contribution across houses based on their contribution towards cost reduction. So HeliosFair has two components, the cost minimization component or CMC and the fair sharing component, FSC. And how it works is, so say there's a coalition of houses that have agreed to share solar energy. They input the per panel annual solar generation plus the solar panel installation cost plus the average averaged annual retail electricity price to CMC. The CMC then outputs the optimal panel distribution across all the houses, the minimum cost required to meet the total demand of all the houses, and hence the cost savings. And this is fed into the FSC, which then provides the final cost distribution as well as the savings for each house in a fair way. So now let me explain each component in a little bit depth. So once the CMC gets this set inputs, it places panels greedily in descending order of their annual solar generation. So in this figure, the deeper colored panels generates more solar. So we'll place deeper panels at these locations first, followed by the lighter colored panels. And we stop installing panels when there are enough panels to meet the total demand, or when it costs more to install a panel than to buy electricity from the utility. So note that the solar installation cost and the average retail electricity prices are fixed, but solar panel generation decreases with each panel. So there may be a time when it's better to buy electricity rather than installing one more panel, and CMC stops at that point. So once CMC stops, we get the panel distribution, the minimized cost, and the cost savings, where savings is the difference in cost when the houses are acting individually versus when they're in coalition. So we then feed these savings into the fair sharing component, which distributes it across the houses using Shapley values. So Shapley values, as we know, is a popular game theoretic technique to fairly share rewards in a cooperative environment. In our context, the houses are acting in a cooperative way, and the reward is a savings obtained. And so how it works is, for each house, we calculate the savings when that particular house is included in a sub-coalition. And we call this the marginal contribution of that house towards getting that savings in that sub-coalition. And then Shapley values takes the weighted average of marginal contributions across all possible sub-coalitions to calculate the savings for that house. So intuitively, you can think of it as that houses with more marginal contributions get more savings, and the contribution can be through either surplus generation or surplus demand. So as houses only install solar panels when there is unmet demand. So coming to the evaluation, we see how much savings the houses get when they form coalitions and share solar energy. And for our evaluation, we considered more than 3,000 houses in a town in the northeastern part of the United States and grouped 20 houses per coalition based on geographical proximity. And the plot here shows the CDF of the cost savings across coalitions. And we see that the solar energy sharing saves 12.7% cost on average, and the cost savings can go up till 37%, which is significant. Next, we show how the fair sharing component distributes savings using Shapley values. So the plot on the left shows how the solar generation and electricity demand of each house is in the coalition, in a particular coalition. And the right plot shows the savings that each house gets in dollars. So house 1, as we can see, generates a lot of surplus solar and hence get high dollar savings. House 16 has a lot of surplus demand, which enables houses with surplus capacity to install more panels and hence reduce their as well as the overall costs. So house 16 also gets high dollar savings. House 6, on the other hand, generates a lot of solar, but most of that solar is spent in meeting its own demand. So the contribution towards the coalition is less, and so house 6 gets less dollar savings. So we see that FSC distributes savings fairly using Shapley values, where houses with more surplus generation or surplus demand across sub-coalitions get more savings. Thus, to sum up, we presented HeliosFair, which is a system to minimize the capex and opex costs of a coalition of houses that share solar energy. It considers factors like solar generation variation across rooftops and provides an average of 12.7% cost savings across coalitions. It also distributes these savings fairly using Shapley values, where houses with more contribution towards the cost reduction get more dollar savings. Thank you. For more details, you can check out our paper, and the QR code is here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
questions? Yeah.
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, thank you for your talk. I was wondering what kind of incentive do we provide to house owners that are over provisioning? Like, because they cannot save more than they actually consume, I assume at least. So, what kind of incentive would they have to form such a house coalition?
So can you please repeat the question? So what kind of incentives do which houses get?
Those that produce more than they need,
Okay.
or that could
So
possibly produce more than they need.
right. So houses with surplus generation, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So houses with surplus generation. So if they act individually, they have certain cost. That's just let's say the solar panel installation cost. But when they share, like install additional panels and share that energy with others, their own cost also decreases a little bit. So you can imagine it as if the house are installing more panels and sell, as if they are selling that surplus generation to other houses which have like unmet demand. So in a way, they are also reducing their own costs. So like both sets of houses reduce their own cost in coalition, were like than what they would have individually.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So we have one more question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I guess a question about how the CapEx is distributed. So for the houses that need to, the ones that are going to generate more demand, how does the CapEx work for the additional solar panels? So assuming that they have to put more solar panels to kind of then sell, would they have to, I guess, did you think about how the CapEx would work and like the ownership of the panels? Just curious in the cases, yeah, for when houses would have to put more panels on to support their neighbors.
So let me see if I got the question. So are you asking like, so the houses that install more panels, so their capex increases. So how does that work? Like how does the capex work in that case?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So what happens here is, yes, finally there is a panel, like this CMC outputs a panel distribution, and there are a set of houses that needs to install these panels. And so these houses, I mean, there are houses which now it has to install more panels, but the capex cost, so there is a total capex cost for installing all the panels, and that total capex cost is shared by everyone. I mean, houses that do not install panels also share part of that capex cost, and CMC and FSC, like our both components, provide that cost distribution. So that final cost distribution for each house includes both the capex and opex for each. So even for houses with extra panels, their costs get distributed, and no house needs to pay more than what they would have paid individually.
Awesome, thank you.
So we have one
Hello?
more question. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So I have a question. Like, I mean, you can do the cost sharing when there is a, I mean, there is a demand supply balance. I'm asking from a power system perspective. Now you have two houses. So my query is that when suppose your net demand of both the houses is,
Right.
for example, 5 kilowatt hour, suppose, but your solar is in surplus, maybe like 10. So what do you do with the surplus generation? I mean, so there is a, I mean, you can just share the 5, I mean, the cost equivalent to the 5, right? What about the surplus solar?
So here houses stop installing panels when the total demand is met. So are you saying the total demand is 5 kilowatts?
No, not about installation. I mean, it's during operation I am asking. Like, I mean, there will be instances where the solar may go above the actual demand.
Okay. I see. So,
Yeah.
So the thing is like we calculate this on an annual scale.
Okay.
And so so let's say for some months there is surplus generation, and during some other months there is surplus demand.
Yeah.
So when there is surplus generation, so we apply this net metering. I mean, net metering is a popularly used technique. So houses use net metering to get credits, and during the times when there is surplus demand, they transfer these net metering credits to the houses so as to offset their cost.
Okay, great, great.
So like recently, this transfer of net metering credits has been allowed in a few places. So I've assumed that our model can also do that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So let's thank all the speakers again. So that will conclude the session.